Hello, everyone. I should be able to have everybody join us shortly with their camera and mic on. Please let us know if you're having any problems so one of us can help you out. Again, this is a new platform, and I would hate for anybody not to be shown at this moment. So let me go ahead and see if that everything is set up correctly. And then Professor Zhuang, you should be able to have yourself on the stage now, if you can turn on your camera or mic. I see we have Evan and Lisa. Suhail, can you hear me all well as well? Okay, great. And then we'll make sure that Georgia can be seen as well. And then and thank you everybody for being patient as we work this all out. Again, we were hoping this would be a lot more streamlined with everybody using Chrome, but it seems like Chrome also wants to give us a couple little issues here.
Georgia, will it let you turn your camera on? Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, it looks like Professor Zhuang isn't showing at the moment.
It says Professor Duong is on the stage, so if they just turn on their video, that we should be able to see them.
Yeah, do you have a camera section still available?
On the bottom.
I've contacted support as well, just so you know. Everything is on your end, so okay. I let support know that you're not showing at the moment. For now, I'll see if they can go ahead and work with you. If you press the lower left-hand bubble to ask support if they can help you with your camera issue, they should be able to work that with you while we're going ahead. Again, I'm really sorry that that's not showing properly for yourself on this end. Thank you. And I'm just talking to support quickly. Okay, well, without further ado, thank you so much for everyone being here. Again, apologies for any time that we've ended up wasting trying to figure this out. I appreciate your patience, and thank you for joining us for our very first panel with the Council on Diversity and Inclusion. I am Alan Josiah, you can call me AJ. I am the undergraduate president of QSCA, Queer Students in Cinematic Arts. Let me go ahead and let Jared introduce himself.
Hey everyone, my name is Jared Marison. I am the graduate president of QSCA, and I am a first year in the graduate production program.
And then we'll go ahead and talk about who's going to be joining us today for this panel. So we have Evan Hughes, who is the Media and Arts and Practice Professor and Assistant Dean of Diversity and Inclusion. We also have Lisa Mann, who is the Animation and Digital Arts Professor and Diversity Liaison for Animation. We have Georgia Jeffries joining us today, who is a screenwriting professor and diversity liaison. Professor Lan Zhuang, who's the director of undergraduate studies and cinema and media studies, I should say, and professor and diversity liaison. And finally, we also have Suhail Kathati, who is our film and television production and diversity liaison, with Gordon Bellamy joining us a little bit later. IMGD professor and CEO and founder of Gay Gaming Professionals. So we hope to see him in a little bit. It seems like Lisa had an issue with hearing Jared, but you can hear me okay, Lisa? Okay, wonderful. So let me go ahead and let Evan take over now. He's going to be speaking on the importance of a diverse LGBTQ representation and the nuance of storytelling within it.
Great. Thanks so much. I'm going to share my screen with everybody right now, if you don't mind. And I just want to make sure that people can see. Can everybody see this?
I can't see anything personally. Is it a link that you can send my way?
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to see if I could share it for you.
Let me try once more. I'll try
Definitely.
sharing the screen again. Sorry about that. Can you see anything now?
Fortunately, no.
All right, I'm gonna send this to you, and then if we can't get it worked out, it's fine. I don't need to do that. Can I throw it in the chat?
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead. Great. Let me go ahead and open this up for you here.
Okay.
Share my screen here with you too.
As we're doing that, I just want to say hi to everybody, and I also want to thank QSCA for inviting us. I'm so excited, honestly, that QSCA is off to a great start, and they're taking up where Queer Cut left off. Before I became the Assistant Dean on Diversity and Inclusion for SCA, really, I was just a queer advocate in media arts and practice, and I would go to all of our council meetings because for me, I thought it was really important that we have voices on the council that really tried to promote a more inclusive community for our queer colleagues and queer students and just our queer community. So are the slides up?
Yes, they should be up. I believe there's a little blue thing blocking your camera some as well, but I don't know if anybody's going to be seeing you right there.
Oh, God. Is that better?
Yes, that's perfect. And then the slides should be seen right now. Can everybody see the slides as well?
Great. And I'll just,
okay, great.
I guess I'll just ask you to forward them. So this first slide is just information for the people on this panel and our other divisional liaisons. We want to share this information with you because we want all of you to know that all of us are here to support you in any way that we can. And we also want you to know that you don't have to contact either me or the person that's from your division. Please contact somebody that you feel comfortable with. Feel free to set up any kind of meeting that you would like with us as well. And we'd love to hear from you throughout the semester. All right, so you know, when I was first asked to do this, I was super excited, I have to say. And when I got the topic, you know, talk about the importance of representation for LGBTQ plus communities, I started to get really nervous for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is that, you know, I'm not sure that I'm necessarily qualified to speak on behalf of all LGBTQ plus communities, of course, and there are really so many answers to this question. But I think at the most general level, I could say that, you know, it's so important for LGBTQ plus representations to be varied, to be complex, and this is always an ongoing evolution. And I'm thinking about my own experience here, but when we're forced to have those uncomfortable, traumatic, and potentially violent conversations or interactions with our families or our communities, we want to know that we're supported and that we're embraced. And I think that what representations in popular media especially help us do is they help introduce queer communities to kind of other communities and kind of the larger community. And I think this is foundational and so important. So on the next slide, this is really what I want to talk about today. And it's just that I want to look at this through the most basic lens, which is the lens of survival. So what we know, you could change the slide. We know that LGBTQ plus teens attempt suicide at a rate that's more than 5 times the rate of non-LGBTQ plus teens. And in the slide here, I show if we break this down by race and ethnicity, we find that it's not equal, right? And so there's a lot of work to be done in different kinds of communities. These are things we should be looking at when we're thinking about representation and the kinds of stories that we want to tell. All right, next slide. And we also know that anti-trans and gender non-binary violence is on the rise. And it really does disproportionately impact young Black and Latinx people. This is another area of representation that needs a lot of work and that we need to focus on as a community. And next slide. And we also know, according to information from the HRC, that in recent years, fewer law enforcement agencies are reporting sexual orientation-based hate crimes to the FBI. There's also fewer medium to large cities that are reporting this information, yet statistics haven't gone down. They've actually increased slightly. What this means is that hate crimes in general are on the rise in the post-marriage equality era. Next slide. And we also know that the history of media has consistently reinforced heteronormativity. And it's done this in so many ways, but a few of the ways are the centering of heterosexual coupling and of romance. In terms of gender, the centering of the male-female binary, the normalization of gender expression that aligns with sex assigned at birth instead of how people we know express themselves, not to mention the long history and legacies of dehumanizing stereotypes that still persist and are circulated in our media ecosystems. Okay, next slide. And for many of us, film and television really is our first encounter with anybody who's queer other than ourselves. And we're asking that image or that representation a lot of questions. So in my case, I'm not quite this old. This was an old movie even back in my day, but I remember watching The Children's Hour, and it had such an impact on me with Audrey Hepburn and with Shirley MacLaine. And it's about them having a relationship that's not explicit in the text. In fact, Shirley MacLaine says she didn't even realize that it was coded lesbian, but it had so much impact on me and meaning. And at the end, when their relationship is going to be discovered, Shirley MacLaine ultimately takes her own life. And in this image right here, the one I remember the most, Audrey Hepburn walks in to see the person that she loves having just taken her life. And, I think as young people, we ask ourselves, is that me? Do I want to be that person? Is it worth it? And so these are all circling kind of in our minds as we're trying to figure out who we are and what our identities are. Next slide, please. So this is super heavy. So I'm actually going to pair this with my first on-screen crush, which was Link from the original Legend of Zelda, that I had this like insane crush on for a very long time. And I think that was a response to some of the traumatic imagery I was seeing, about my own identity on the screen, right? And I've been talking with some of my friends when I found out about this particular presentation, and so many of them have, forced me to ask myself, what if I had never been seen at all? In fact, just a few days ago, I was talking with some of my trans friends of color, and they were saying, in the late 90s and early aughts, I never saw a mainstream representation of myself. And so I think we also need to acknowledge that that erasure is a very aggressive form of discrimination and violence against our communities. And that's another thing that we need to deal with. All right, next slide. And so I want to introduce this concept called the burden of representation. I see Michael Renov is somewhere in the audience. I know we read about this in your class in a different way, but I apply it thinking about the fact that there are so few representations of certain communities that each one takes on the burden of representing every aspect of that community and is taken for real. And you can imagine there's no such thing as a perfect representation in kind of that context. And so next slide. And so what I'm saying is that we need to change the balance here. We need to get to the point where negative or stereotypical characters are part of such a large matrix of representation, of queer representation, I should say, that it doesn't matter if one representation is stereotypical or problematic. Each representation won't be forced to speak on behalf of all queer communities and does not suffer from that burden of representation that I just talked about. So I just want to briefly look at a couple contemporary media examples. Next slide, please. I want to preface this by saying that the Berlanti production company, which has done a lot of work in depicting queer characters, a diverse set of queer characters on the CW, on Netflix that really targets young people, has done important work. But I am going to look at Love, Simon critically, because Love, Simon was talked about a lot as being the first, I'll put it in quotes, so the first studio-produced rom-com that featured a gay protagonist, right? And my question really is that I think this is important, and the fact that it made a lot of money so other films could get made is really important. But why must the first center the most privileged of queer representations, that of the cis, white, middle-class male? Right? There's such a long history of coming out narratives in indie film. Why does the first mainstream film have to do this? Next slide. Oh, let's keep it here for a second. And in the last slide, there's this other character that doesn't quite make the poster. His name is Ethan, and he wasn't in the original source material, but they kind of added him in, right? To me, this is the ultimate tokenism. He gets added in, and he's there to show the non-white queer representation, right? This sort of balance or counter to what Simon is going through. But really, he's in this narrative only to serve kind of Simon's larger coming of age, his narrative. And so many of the fans and people around this film that were talking about this film said that, gosh, Ethan was such a more interesting character that really should have been not only developed, but probably been the protagonist. All right, so next slide. And so I think that the Berlanti production company, to a certain extent, heard this. And the same writers who did Love, Simon now have this new TV show on Hulu called Love, Victor. And they tried to kind of shift the emphasis away from whiteness by replacing the Simon's character with a Latinx character around a Latinx family. And I think that, you know, maybe this is the beginning of some important work, but I think we need to really apply a critical lens to this and begin to think about what representation really means to us, you know, as a community. You know, what about behind the camera? Does it matter that both of these actors are in the, I call it the love comma universe, are straight males? Should we care about that? Should we call for something different? What I'm arguing for is that we need to move behind the camera to think about representation. We need to celebrate and examine work that is being done to diversify the representation of our various LGBTQ plus communities. Next slide, please. And so I think that starting especially in 2018, you get a lot of movement. So you have the first episode of TV directed by a trans woman of color, Janet Mock. and this was part of Pose. And I think Pose and the documentary Disclosure that have recently come out are really important, because not only are they kind of representing a facet of queer representation that doesn't historically hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but they're also thinking about what's going on at the level of the crew. And so in both of these examples, they're working on trying to hire as many trans crew members as possible. So SCA invited Sam Feder to come talk about Disclosure last semester, and there was a Vision and Voices event where Sam is also going to be on a panel, which I think everybody should attend. But one of the things that Sam talked about that I thought was great is that Sam really wanted, the whole creative team wanted to make sure that the entire crew was trans. And so when they tried to find and recruit people, they realized that they were having a very difficult time finding trans people to fill these positions. And so what they did is they created a shadowing or mentor program. And they said, okay, you know, we will hire you and knowing that you're not trans or probably not even queer, but what we want you to do is we want you to mentor a trans person so that the next time we make a film, or, you know, the next crew or production company that wants to do something, there will be people to fill this spot. Because I think at the end of the day, what we're looking for is we're really looking for people who are representative of the communities that are being represented in front of the camera, to also be making decisions behind the camera and to be on the teams kind of producing everything from the look and feel of these particular representations to the stories themselves. And that's it for me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Evan. I think that was really in-depth and gave us a lot of insight, even with contemporary media representation. I definitely agree that we need to see those things early on, because had I never seen anybody like myself, I wouldn't have been as accepting as myself. I want to also say hello to Professor Zhuang. I believe now everybody can see her. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, hi everybody.
Okay, wonderful. So we're going to move on forward to Georgia Jeffries to talk about the explosion, or yes, sorry, how queer representation can best ethically be expressed in the writer's room without being simply a diversity hire.
Okay. All right, thank you. And I'm happy to, I guess, be seen by all of you. I can't see all of you, but I think what we're talking about is being seen. Each of us being seen in our complexity and our nuance. And so I'm going to talk to you all as if I were convening the first class of one of my thesis classes, BFA, MFA, and I'm going to talk about character. And I'm going to talk about why, if you are a writer creating character, creating multi-dimensional character, that is your best insurance and guarantee of being fully seen in the writer's room, as opposed to being marginalized by any label, whether it's how you identify yourself through class, ethnicity, gender. If you can access the full breadth and depth of your authenticity, because you are a diamond. You are a diamond with many facets, and none of us is defined by just one facet or one aspect of us. So the more that your work that you represent reflects the multiplicity of your gifts and also of your strengths and also of your fears and your vulnerabilities, then the better writer you are, and the more that you will find an audience, a universal audience, so that you will not be limited or marginalized by one label or another. And I think that a really deep entry into who we want to be seen as is to determine what our voice is. And this is a gradual blossoming and unfolding, but most often you will be hired in any writer's room by virtue of the voice that they identify you as having. So let's look at what that means in the entertainment industry. What does having a voice mean? Well, we know that writing is an intellectual craft, but let me say from my point of view that it is an art based on emotion. And I don't know that anger, rage, let me pick two really interesting emotions that I think many of us writers write from, grief, sadness, loss, longing. I don't know that any of those have a particular ethnicity or gender. What they do have is a common universality, and we access those emotions through the prism of our own experience. And one universal experience that we all share is our family system. And so we talk a lot about, as we should, systemic racism, classism, sexism, ageism. But let us all talk about family systems, because I think that some of the greatest television series have been based on family. And to me, one of the most outstanding pilots ever written is 6 Feet Under. I don't know how many of you have seen it. I wish I could see hands here, but it was actually launched in 2001, I believe it was. And as I recall, that was the first major gay protagonist in cable series drama. It was also a family ensemble. And in fact, when we used to have our own course syllabi for our thesis classes, that was the pilot that I required every single one of my students to read, because the 5 seasons of that show became a novel unfolding, showing how David, the gay character, came into his own strength and power within a family system that did not encourage that when he was younger. I hope that you are all choosing role models, not just shows that you like or films that you like that speak to you, but role models who are writers and creative artists. Of course, Alan Ball is very well known. I don't know how many of you know that Toni Graphia, who's a co-executive producer of The Outlander, is also gay, and she is very supportive of the community. And in fact, I have had her speak in my classes, and I hope that your organization is able to invite her to speak, because she has had quite a journey in terms of her entering the business and being able to fully blossom as a writer in terms of her authenticity. I think that it's also really important to look at the journey as opposed to where any character is at any given point in time. You'll learn a lot in your classes about how to determine what the character's want is, because underneath that is the need that is exposed and revealed through the journey. And in my thesis classes, sometimes if there's a struggle to find out exactly what that want is or the need, I also ask them to look at what is the deepest fear of the character. And I think that sometimes is the real key that opens. It opens the treasury of how that character is more fully developed. I think the greatest thing that we can do as writers is to enlighten our audiences. There's a lot of ignorance among audiences of people who have not had experience with the other, whoever the other is. And so there's amazing bias. And there is such short-handed thinking. I remember when I went in for one of my early interviews when I was breaking into the business, I had written an indie film about a young woman, an MP in the military, and she was fighting harassment and bigotry in the military. And I went in for my interview, and the executive blanched, looked at me and said, I thought it was George Jeffries. He couldn't imagine that I had written a story about the military, used the language I had used, dealt with certain issues that I had, because he would have assumed a woman couldn't have done that at the time. In fact, he did. But you know what? I got in the room. I didn't get a job, but I got in the room. And that's the most important thing I want you to do. I want you to get in the room and show all of your depth and your breadth of who you are and what you can bring to your art. So if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to hear them later on.
Thank you so much for that. I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. But next up, we're going to be hearing from Professor Duong on the perspective of queer representation in media outside of the United States, specifically in Asian and Southeast Asian cinema. Take it away. Thank you.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so my name is Professor Lan Zung. I'm in Cinema Media Studies, and I am so happy to be a part of this discussion, and thank you for the invitation. My specialization is Asian and Asian American cinema, and I think that last year was a great year for Asian Americans on screen. And even though we had a president or former president who called the coronavirus the Asian or Chinese flu, and there were so many acts of violence committed against Asian Americans and Asians, we still had a great year for Asian Americans on screen. So I just wanted to put that out there. One of the films that really caught my eye last year was Alice Wu's The Half of It. And I think her work, if you haven't seen it yet, she had also done something very path-breaking with another film called Saving Face. I just wanted to bring to the fore two kinds of Asian American films, independent kind of works, maybe categorized as art cinema, that really get into the marrow of being both Asian American, being queer, being a woman, being of a certain class. In The Half of It deals with being an Asian American queer woman in a rural setting. So I think that kind of movie, that kind of setting, those kinds of characters, building off of what Georgia is talking about, was so resonant with me. It really speaks to how the director wanted to present a full humanity to her subjects, but also allow a kind of intersectional way of understanding these subjects, because they have different identity categories that they are, both limited by, but are also learning from and are expanding on or building off of by the end of the film. It is a really touching film, Half of It. So that's my pitch for Asian American cinema, queer Asian American cinema. And then in terms of Asian cinema and Southeast Asian cinema, there has been a great a proliferation of queer Asian representations. And I think that has a lot to do with, going back to what Evan has talked about, a lot of queer Asian filmmakers who are getting behind projects and projecting and bringing to the fore the ways in which queer Asians and their lived realities play out in ways that really allow us to think about how the out narrative, what is the dominant narrative of coming out of the closet, is so very based on Western conceptions of what it means to be queer or trans, or having an out identity, because of the kinds of films that I'm attuned to or that I'm watching. And I'll just talk about one in particular, although he's not queer himself. It's Happy Together by Wong Kar-wai. It's one of my favorite films. And for the class that I'm teaching right now, CTCS 201, History of International Cinema, I specifically wanted a film that deals with queer Asian identities. And not only that, but as you probably know, Wong Kar-wai also sets it in South America, this beautiful love story. And it's a very global and transnational piece, work. But at the same time, at the heart of it is the makeup and the breakup of these two men. And so for the international cinema class, I really had to think think about what kinds of films I should be showing. Should they be canonical? What does that mean? And should we change up the canon, in fact, in terms of what international cinema means? And I am going to quote Evan and his presentation and say, let's fuck it up, because I think it's high time that we really look outside of American canons of filmmaking, but then also queer filmmaking. I'm sorry, my alarm has gone off. Can you hold on for just a minute? Or
not a problem.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so Happy Together. I'm happily putting together queer Asian and Asian American cinemas to discuss the way in which we need to have what a writer has said, narrative plenitude, the good, the bad, the ugly. We need to have it all. And as professors and filmgoers and spectators of film and critics, we also need to have representation on the screen, behind the scenes, but also as critics, professors, as reviewers, as writers, so that we could proliferate queer discourse in many different contexts. And so I'll end on that note, but again, if there are any questions, I'm happy to field them as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor. I'm actually part of that international cinema course. I'm very much looking forward to that film now. I wasn't aware exactly of the story, so thank you so much for sharing that. I believe we'll move forward now to Suhail, and we want to understand a little bit better the how entertainment professionals with less agency or resources are able to enact or support positive change within queer representation in the industry and within media. I don't believe we can hear you. At least I can't. Can anybody else? No luck there either.
You mute the microphone and then unmute it?
No. Let me see if I can try. I heard something for a second.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. We got a commercial going. Fantastic. I am a motion picture sound editor. I have spent 35 years working in editorial and post-production. So my world is much smaller than the rest. We are a much more intimate group of people that we work with. And it's the question that's been put upon me is kind of a little bit of a tough question, because it's more about representing yourself and being yourself and doing the job well. Okay. And I think if you do that, I think then that will change the way people will perceive you. Because generally speaking, I mean, in my experience at least, we really didn't care what your choices were. It was just more about, you know, how well did you perform and how well did you collaborate and deliver what you needed to do. But I think it's all about going out there and just representing yourself, and just be honest with yourself, and try to be a professional at it. And then it really doesn't matter, you know. It truly doesn't. Georgia kind of put it there. She would say the voice, and that's true. And what it is that it's coming into a business where you have to make an effort. You can't just say, oh, you're going to hire me because I am X or Y or Z or D or whatever the case may be. It's, you have to get in there and you got to make an effort. And the voice is that once you show up in the room, then you've got to perform. You know, then you've got to do it. Whether you're a picture editor or whether you're a sound editor or a music editor or whatever the case may be, you've got to be able to deliver. Now, certain jobs, like for example, a picture editor is a very political job. You know, it's the storyteller. The person is a storyteller, but it's also a very political job. They are juggling producer, director, studio executives, and so forth. They're trying to make all those people happy and keep everybody kind of, you know, in their place, so to speak. So the ability to be part of that is being in the room and being the voice and showing people that it doesn't really matter what you are. You're a pro and you're a filmmaker and you're going to do what you're going to do. So this is a very difficult question because it's you know, people ask me this all the time, and it's kind of a hard question to answer because it's on multi levels. Okay. It's are you coming in because you're queer, or you're coming in because you're a filmmaker? You know what I mean? It's that attitude, and you have to kind of. And I know I'm going to get in trouble for it. I already know it. So you know, but it's a matter of you making that effort to get where you want to get to, and the thing is that, you know, we talk also about paying it forward. Okay. So as you progress, you can pull in your friends, you can pull in your classmates. And then at that point, it really doesn't matter. You know, you're there. You know, behind the scenes becomes one of those things to where it's usually a small group. We talk about the motion picture business, the entertainment business as being huge. And in a lot of ways it is, but in reality, it really isn't. It's about small teams working together, whether it's a small group of writers, whether it's a director, producer, small group of producers, editors and stuff like that. And camera, it's all a small group. All right. So it's about being involved and about getting into that group and being part of that group, and not, you know, and how do I put it? Be yourself, by all means. Always be yourself, because if you're not yourself, then you're not going to succeed. You're just not. You know, I'm Arabic and Armenian. You know, I came into this business, you know, as one of the oddballs, and the only way to get beyond that being an oddball, I'm still an oddball, but by getting beyond that is by being yourself. All right. And for a long time, I didn't quite understand what all that was until 9/11. When 9/11 hit, one of the people we were working with, who's a bonehead, I know, the first thing they said was, we need to get rid of all the Arabs. And one of my fellow workers said, well, you want to get rid of Sohail? And they stopped and they thought. It's like, well, no. Well, he's Arabic. What are you trying to say here? So but I was myself. I stayed myself. I stayed true to myself. I kept my name. I did everything. I didn't change my name to, to some English name that everybody can pronounce and so forth. And I think that's the key, is that to move forward, to be successful, to be part of that community. And how do you make that change is by being there, representing yourself, being yourself, and then bringing people like yourself, if that's the case, okay, into that community. And that's how it can work. You gotta play it forward. You really do. So, but this is it's tough. It really is tough, especially in a small community, and in a small community, in a small pond, so to speak. You can be a big fish, and you can be a very successful fish in that sense. Just because, I'm going to quote Georgia again, you're the voice, you're in the room, you're there, you're doing the job, and you're doing it well. And that's the key to it all, is that you need to put your talent up front. That's what it is. It's not what your preferences are, who whatever choices you've made, whomever you may be, your talent has to be number one. That's what's going to make it happen for you. So
thank you so much for that. And one of the objectives of QSCA is we're really trying to not only create a community while we're here as students, but beyond, as we're professionals, bringing each other into the industry and really helping advance representation. But next up, we're going to hear from Professor Lisa Mann, and she's going to speak on the explosion of LGBTQ plus representation in recent children's animation and Time's Up for the Boys Club. Thank you.
I don't know if Lisa was able to hear us. Were you able to hear us there? Great. Your mic's muted too.
Okay, hello everyone. So you may have noticed that I have a stony look on my face during this entire panel. That's because I can't hear anyone and I don't lip read. So my audio has not been working this entire time, except for I did hear Evan, and I just now heard you, Alan, but that's it.
You heard me finally. Again, sorry about those issues. We'll have it recorded so you can enjoy our jokes later on as well.
Good, because I think Lon was really funny. Everyone was laughing, so.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to try, I'm having such a bad technical fail. I guess I'll just keep trying to do something technical. So here I go. I'm going to try to share my screen. It's my turn, right, Alan?
Yes.
Okay.
And if you can't share your screen, you can send it to me and I can share for you.
Okay. Okay, that's not right. I need to choose a different screen.
You can switch over to the other tab. We can see the entire desktop right now.
Okay, I have a second monitor, so I was trying to use that. It worked in the test earlier, but
I want to put our meeting on the other monitor.
Won't work now, of course. Can you see that?
We see the slideshow now. Yes, if you want to present it.
Yes. Okay. Great. So let's see. Okay, that's good. Sorry, I have to rearrange. I had everything on the opposite side.
Time, please.
Okay. So is that filling your screen now?
That it is.
Are you all seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, I can't hear you, so.
We are.
This is very strange. Okay. So I'm going to start. I think you can read the title of what I'm about to say. The explosion of LGBTQ plus in recent children's animation, and Time's Up for the Boys Club. So, let's see. So I confess I have never watched an episode of Steven Universe, or I had never watched an episode of Steven Universe or Adventure Time before I hosted Rebecca Sugar's visit to SCA in 2019. I quickly learned that I was in the minority. As you can see, she packed the 100-seat theater with the most joyful, colorful, and reverential student audience in distant memory. It was exactly what they wanted, an honest, intimate conversation with the creator of a show that they adored. Good vibrations in that room. Love flowing reciprocally, each holding the other up. So when QSCA asked me and the other diversity liaisons to give a short presentation on this panel, I thought maybe I could revisit Rebecca Sugar and delve a little bit deeper and maybe connect the show to the state of the animation industry. So, yeah, I wanted to start with a few examples of recent children's commercial animation with queer themes and characters. So when Rebecca Sugar joined Adventure Time as a storyboarder, she noticed that there were no LGBTQ plus characters, and she worried that some kids watching might feel excluded. So she set to work designing 2 new queer characters, Marceline the Vampire Queen. That's the one with the black hair. But you all know this. Of course, I know that the people in this audience know far more about these characters, I'm sure, than I do. So they probably need no introduction, but I will anyway, just for the panelists. Marceline the Vampire Queen and Princess Bubblegum. And she also wrote new G-rated storylines because, after all, this is for children. So Rebecca also introduced her gender fluid character at that time. So after Adventure Time, Rebecca pitched her show to Steven Universe to Cartoon Network in 2012. It had 6 seasons starting in 2013, I believe. Actually 5, I think. And it's really brilliant at navigating complex topics such as homophobia, anxiety, gender identity, sexuality, unconventional family structures, domestic violence, and in a really accessible way for children. And this was, this is a breakthrough. This is a, in some ways, really the first of its kind. And I love this quote right here from GLAAD's Leo Rocha, that he was jealous that he didn't get to watch Steven Universe growing up. So after she came out as bisexual to the audience at the 26th Comic-Con, Rebecca said to the audience, "There's an idea that these themes should not be shared with kids, but everyone shares stories about love and attraction with kids. It really makes a difference to hear stories about how someone like you can be loved." So I think that was her motivating sort of driving force. So I'll let you read this quote. I think it's brilliant. Let it sink in. She also said, "There's been almost 110 years of animated content, but only a few LGBTQIA creators in that time. So real equality would be if the next 100 years were filled with exclusively queer content by queer creators. That would be equality. Okay, moving on to She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. This is a DreamWorks show. She-Ra is LGBTQ inclusive. It's an inclusive animated series. In the show's 5th and final season, Adora and her girlfriend Katra confirm their queerness when they confessed their romantic love for each other and kissed in the last episode. I wish I could see you all out there, because I'm sure you're like waving your arms, because you probably have seen this. So this goes beyond sisterly love, yet models healthy romantic love. And she credits Noelle Stevenson, the showrunner, credits Rebecca Sugar and Adventure Time and Steven Universe and the other shows that came before. For the final series episode, Noelle finally worked up the courage to tell the executives on the show how the story would end with Adora and Katra. And she described it like coming out to the executives that the two women leads were queer. Having that kind of familiar anxiety about what that reaction would be, as if she was talking to her family and coming out to her family. She said after that conversation, the execs were amazing. They said, okay, we're in, but then they had to go to their bosses, and those bosses had to go to their bosses. So it actually took quite a while to get full approval to have this romantic season ending kiss and conclusion. So there were a lot of people to get on board. All right, I would be remiss if I did not bring up the SpongeBob. During 2020 Gay Pride Month, and for some people they would be saying, finally, Nick officially confirmed SpongeBob SquarePants status as a long-running LGBTQ plus character and icon. So I want to say that Stephen Hillenberg and I were at CalArts at the same time together. He was a good friend of mine. He recently died of ALS, and which is a tragedy. But he always said that SpongeBob was asexual. But I can't help but think that now that times have sort of moved on, we've progressed, that he might revisit that. I think as a marine biologist, he knew that most sponges are actually hermaphrodites. So they function with both sexes simultaneously. So I really feel like if he were alive today, he might revise SpongeBob's gender identity. Okay. I'm going to try to go faster. Am I way over time? I don't know. I can't hear you, so it doesn't
You're
matter.
not over time. You have some more time if you like, no problem. It looks like
you're going to have to do sign language, Alan, because I can't hear. No, I'm okay. Thumbs up.
Good.
All right. So I'm going to kind of turn left a little bit here and talk about society, greater society for a second. So these are some events, not too far in the distant past, but a little bit back. So President Clinton passed Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 1993. And in 1996, Clinton passed the Defense of Marriage Act, known as DOMA, preventing same-sex marriage benefits. And then Obama in 2010 appealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. 2013, the Supreme Court strikes down the Defense of Marriage Act. Happy days there. In 2015, the Supreme Court declared same-sex marriage legal in all 50 states. But then 2016 came around, And Trump was elected, as you know, and he basically kicked all the transgender people out of the military. And the animation industry, by all accounts, gets more cautious about the kinds of content and characters that they may be able to continue or ramp up.
I don't know if we lost Lisa due to connectivity issues, but that is what it looks like at the moment. Alrighty, so we'll wait a second to see if Lisa comes back. I hope very soon and without too much of a problem. In the meantime, if we want to go ahead and start transitioning to a few Q&A, and then once she rejoins, then we can go ahead and finish off the rest of the presentation. Do you want to go ahead and vet the rest of the questions there, Jared?
It looks like we have one question already. To all the panelists, what can people on the business or executive side do to encourage more diverse representation of queer stories?
I think I'll take a stab at this, even though I'm more on the academic side than Georgia and Suhail here. But I think one of the things that I hear about a lot when I work with the graduate students is that some of the programs that or the writers for certain kinds of initiatives within the industry tend to pit different minority groups against one another, so that there's either some kind of like studio benefit or tax benefit to including, I'll put it in quotes, diversity into the crews, let's say, or into the cast. And oftentimes you only need to include one category of diversity. So what happens is you have people of color pitted against LGBTQ people, pitted against people with disabilities, et cetera, all kind of competing for the same access to the industry. And so pipeline programs in some way become really problematic in terms of that, and also just the way that certain contracts are written. So I think we need to challenge that model.
Absolutely. Go ahead. I was going to introduce you, everyone.
Suhail, or yeah, I'll go after Suhail.
My feeling is regarding this is like orange is the new black. It's you need to write these characters in, and that's the way to do it. And you know, one of the things that we always talk to our students about is that you're the future filmmakers, which means you're going to get to a point to where you're going to start doing this kind of stuff, and you should be doing this kind of stuff. I've been watching a lot of BBC television and stuff like that, and a lot of the newer shows are very diverse, extremely diverse.
Yes.
And they work great. They're fantastic. The story's still good. You know, the acting is fabulous, and but you gotta write them in. So the way to get the studio executives to do it is like you gotta do it. That's it. It just falls back to the Me movement. It's like, well, why aren't there enough more women directing or producing or whatever? Well, you gotta hire them. You gotta bring them in. You gotta do it. So that's the deal. If you force the issue, then you're going to get a backlash of all this. But bottom line is you got to start writing it. And you got to start making it part of the story, and once that happens, then it just starts to all integrate, and it's like that's the way it was all the time. So that's my.
I want to share your soapbox with you, Suhail, because my experience with executives is they're so bottom line driven. If something has been a success, then they will, they are looking for something that's a variation on something that's been successful, but maybe not too much of a variation, because then that might put them at risk. So what I say to you is, you be the brave, courageous one that is going to write exactly what you want to see on the air. And you may meet in time, as I have at different times, an executive or a producer who says, I'm willing, I'm secure enough in my career right now that I can take a chance on this writer who I am excited about, because I am seeing characters written in ways that I haven't seen before. So don't be anybody's imitation, be your own original, and take the risk. Take the risk. And let me tell you, I've taken so many risks with so many pilots, that I've been hired to write, but then have not been greenlit for one reason or another. But you know what? It always got me to the next job or the next hire, and also to the next relationship, who I knew had similar visions to myself. So don't censor yourself. Don't censor yourself, but also surprise whoever's going to read your script. And I mean that by dealing with queer characters and non-queer characters. Just don't censor yourself or limit yourself in terms of what you want to say, because part of that voice that they're buying is the guts that you have, that they may not necessarily be walking and talking yet, but they're going to be attracted to the charisma of that kind of writing. And so they will be more likely to sell you. And they might not buy your pilot yet, but they will place you on a show. And when you get on a show, then you start writing more queer characters, some based on your own personal experience and beyond. There was I'm a romantic at heart. There is a series in the Saturday LA Times called LA Affairs. And every Saturday, if you ever read digital LA Times, somebody is writing about a romance in LA. And last Saturday, the name of this, I wanted to share it with you. It's called Not Ready to Share Us with the World. And it was a story of a couple. One was out, the other one was not out to his family. And so the relationship ended. And the writer of this article said that he thought that the whole journey was always about finding one another, but also finding oneself. And I would think that's particularly true for any marginalized community. And I think it's also true for every artist and every writer.
Thank you so much for sharing that as well. I think it's a great perspective on how to actually get your voice heard and seen in the industry. At the moment, it looks like Lisa is joining us again. So if we can give Lisa an opportunity to finish off the rest of her presentation without issue, I hope we can. And then we can go back into the Q&A right afterward.
I don't want to take too long. I have no idea where I left off.
I think I remember 2016 and Trump being the last sign, and then, but I'm not positive on that. If you like, we can go into the Q&A and you can answer some of the questions. It's all up to you, Lisa.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that would be fine. I presented some research that's been done about the animation industry, but that's fine. Maybe, yeah.
We don't have to skip that. No, you're welcome to show it. I just wanted to do what's most comfortable for you.
I can't believe I can hear you.
I know, that's incredible.
Well, let's see. Maybe I will just show the industry part. Yeah, I can start from here, I guess.
Yes, it looks like you left off where the animators have been, less willing to approach queer characters because of Trump.
Right. Okay, well, okay. I'm sorry, everyone. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble.
Not a problem.
Oops, no. What are you seeing now?
Your presentation again.
Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
2021?
Yep.
Now I can't hear you.
We are seeing your screen. Can you hear me now?
Okay, I need like this. If you can see my screen, I need a thumbs up. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, let's see if I can go full screen now. I hope you can see that. Okay, yes, the good news is that we had another election. And so, yes, 2021, Biden, and now he's reverse transgender in the military. So this is what you missed, basically. USC's Annenberg Inclusion Initiative, they ran a really wonderful research study increasing inclusion in animation, which involved them researching and doing an online survey and doing interviews with women in the animation industry in 2018. And I hope you will allow me to extrapolate from that, because I do think it's actually because they don't have a specifically LGBTQ research that they've done in the animation industry. And so I really do feel like many of the suggestions they made are very applicable. What they found was that that there are really major impediments to creating equity for women and by extension other marginalized groups in the animation industry. The first thing is there's a very exclusive culture of the boys club, as in the old boys club. And it's a masculine, heterosexual, white culture that favors and rewards those with similar traits. So anyone identifying outside of this group may not feel valued, may experience bias, and likely will not feel a sense of belonging in the organization. And they're more likely to leave. People of color especially feel isolated and lonely. The next thing is that the legacy of the 9 old men at Disney, the early days of animation, when women were relegated to only inking and painting, it still impacts the animation industry. Each animation job is stereotypically assigned as a masculine or feminine job. So it sounds crazy, but for example, producing requires feminine skills and directing requires masculine skills. And the industry still relies on stereotyped expectations of ability based on gender and other traits to ascertain who might fit or be less risky as a leader, rather than objectively evaluating an individual's skills and using objective hiring criteria. So they came up with some solutions to eliminate systemic inequality in the animation industry. You can read through these, but basically they counter all of the impediments that I had on the screen before this. And, you know, it's creating a culture where everyone feels like they belong, that they're not other, they're not outside. And that has to be done not only by the individuals, from the CEO down to the interns, you know, and everybody in between. The boys club has to go. And, you know, not only individuals, but also the organization. So they have to find ways to be really, really inclusive and respect diverse people and voices. Then, of course, evaluate talent fairly without stereotyping. And the fact is that your generation, you are the most diverse generation ever that is ever going to be entering the animation industry. And you are the most, like, oh, I hate saying, well, okay, I'm going to say it, the most woke generation. And, you know that it should be diverse, and you're not going to stand for it. You're not. And they have to realize that unless they change, they will lose you. They are going to lose you. They're going to lose talent. They're going to lose creative power. So I'm really hopeful. And so they wrapped up this this initiative, this research project, with a really nice quote, I thought, about the animation industry. What emerged is a picture of an industry grappling with how to create greater inclusion while situated in a legacy that privileges certain types of stories and storytellers. And so with that, I also wanted to let you know that there is an active animation guild. It's the union, the local LA-based union, and it's quite active, and there are lots of members, and this is the queer committee of that. And it's good to know that they are there and that they have your back. And finally, this is my last card, sorry. I do have links to all the articles and research that I referenced, and I'm going to share that in the chat. This is an image of Pink Dolphin, which was a short experimental film about a queer pink dolphin, and it was made by an alum from 2017, Contuo, and I would love to share that link with you too. So that is it. Let me see if I can get out of here and back to you. Did I do it?
I think you did. Can you hear me?
Oh my gosh.
And hear me too? Yes, all of us? Okay, perfect. Sounds good. Thank you so much for sharing the end of that. I think it was really great being able to see it.
Yeah, and please, if you can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Awesome. Well, welcome back. Hopefully you can drop that link in the chat. I'm sure everyone would love to check that out right after this. And speaking of kind of queer representation in animation and what we can be doing to advance that entire industry, we have a great question from Tyler. Is there a market for queer animated narratives in the Asian market, considering the restrictions countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and even China have on film with censorship laws there? And this is to anyone in the panel.
Well, I don't know much about that, except to say that I do know that in some countries like Malaysia, I think everything has to be very coded to pass through, or it's not going to make it. And so some of the things that I was sharing with you, the obviously romantic same-sex love, I don't think that will fly in some of those countries.
I can say something. Can you hear me? Okay. And it's really hard to talk about Asian cinemas in their specificities in terms of the kinds of film products and cultural productions that come from each country. Each country has different colonial legacies that have really affected what homosexuality, how it's perceived, and also how it's legislated or and how it's understood in terms of the state. So I have to say I don't know too much about animation. I just want to say that within Asian context, if you were to study the different kinds of films that come from the different countries, you'll see that because of these historical contexts, the ways in which queer representations have been produced, one really needs to contextualize these representations. And why I say that is because there are stricter laws against the visualization, the representation of queerness and transness, and it depends on religion. It depends on, again, perhaps a colonial history, or it depends on whether or not the country a socialist country. So it's really hard to say. I would just say that for certain countries within Asia, the queer representations are very hard to get by in terms of censorship controls, absolutely. But there is also a very ready audience of queer activists, of queer filmmakers and artists who have, in different contexts, readily support these kinds of representations. So it really depends on the context.
I wanted to just add and ask real quick. So, I mean, it really does sound as though it's hard to say that any one specific country would reject, queer themes in animation or any film for that matter. Would you say that there are certain Asian countries that are more accepting and willing to do that?
Yes. Like, for example, I think Lisa talked about Indonesia or Malaysia. And so I know, because I have some queer scholars of film or scholars looking at queer films in Indonesia, that the art scene there that supports queer filmmaking, and they organize queer film festivals. They are very active, but there's also a great resistance against these same spaces, same communities, because of the kinds of national identities that the states are invested in showing in terms of their cultural products. So it is very vexed, some of these representations, and even screening these images or screening these films can be very hard. So again, it really depends on the context.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that insight. I think there is actually one specific question to you as well. And that's just asking for any more recommendations that you might have that were similar to the films you mentioned earlier too.
Oh, okay. Gosh, in terms of Asian cinema, I'm blanking out right now. Can I get back to y'all about that?
If you end up sending us, more links and information and titles, we can send that out to everybody after this too. So, I'm sure there's a lot of names to try to remember off the top of your head. I would not be good at that personally, so.
Okay. Yeah. Let me look into it, and I'll be right back.
Okay, not a problem.
Chat.
I will say now, because we are at the end of our schedule, thank you for everybody that came. We are going to continue going through Q&A. If you'd like to stay with us, if any of the panelists need to go, if any of you need to go, obviously you're welcome to. And if those are staying, we would love to continue with the questions as well. Is that okay with everybody that's on the panel and or that would like to say? Okay, perfect. Jared, do you want to start off with some of the other questions we received prior?
I would love to. Our first question that we had during our registration is, with the proliferation of queer characters in mainstream media, is there still a place for explicitly queer shows? Do they serve a positive purpose, or do they diminish queer acceptance in the mainstream? To the whole panel.
Well, I can take a first stab at that. If we look at the history of queer cinema, there's this kind of moment in the late 1980s and early 1990s that has been called, new queer cinema, right? And it's this moment where you get these new kinds of stories and new sorts of storytelling techniques that are meant to drive the discussion in different ways. So I think it's really important that we have all of these mainstream representations that are increasingly becoming more inclusive and more willing to present communities and stories and issues than we had beforehand. But an important kind of space here to always be pushing against what the sort of the mainstream idea of what queer stories or queer representation is. I think it's our project to be challenging that at the level of storytelling and also, or content, and then also at the level of style. So I think that there's something to be said in terms of maybe a queer aesthetic. So in countries that we're talking about that you can't have explicit representations of queer identity or interactions per se, there might be ways in terms of aesthetics and style and that sort of thing that connects what would be like an indie queer sensibility in our media with another like cultural context that would kind of help connect and produce that kind of network. And so in the early 90s, if you look at the work of like the teenager Sadie Benning, for example, there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of gender and queerness at that time, or the films of a USC student like Greg Araki, who's dealing with subject matter like, you know, AIDS and, you know, thinking about the end of life for people before medication could help. There's still a lot of stories to be mined that I think the mainstream audiences are unwilling, not audiences, mainstream industry is not ready to tell, that I think it's our responsibility as creators to tell those stories.
Thank you so much for sharing that as well, Evan. I think you answered that question very succinctly and clearly. I will go forward to the next one just to preserve the time. So we actually had a student that had asked because they had felt the diversity courses that they have taken so far on LGBTQ on diversity and inclusion, I should say, have neglected the LGBTQ plus content and representation. And they wanted to know kind of how professors can foster a welcoming environment, improve their curriculums, and ensure no student is either silenced, ignored, or hurt by this, since they felt that way with their own, when they reached out to their own professors.
I don't want to take up anybody's talking time, so if anybody can chime in instead of me. I don't want to be the steal all the oxygen, but I say that I encourage faculty members to go out to other faculty members who are experts. I teach a new diversity class, and as I mentioned at the beginning, that it's impossible for me to understand what it's like to be somebody other than I am, right? And so I can't speak on all aspects of diversity, even all aspects of, like, you know, queer diversity, right? And so I think that we have so many amazing makers and scholars within SCA. It is really a premier institution that we need to be willing to reach out so that we can invite those people in, or, you know, reach into their network so we can invite people in. We share resources so everybody has, you know, the best experience in the classroom.
Yeah, and I think it's incumbent on every professor to reach out to expand the syllabi, to make sure there is full representation of film and television and other media that's discussed in the classroom, and to ask the students to get their feedback. It is a dialogue. We are not only teaching, we are learning from our students. So that requires an open mind and a sense of humility and curiosity from each professor. So that's something that we discuss a great deal in our writing division, because we want to support each student's individual story, not something that is superimposed upon that student from our point of view.
I think that's such an important point, Georgia, because I know that in the 150 class that I'm teaching, on the first week, I was called out because I tried so hard. I worked with the TAs to come up with a film list that, you know, I thought was inclusive and as diverse as it could be. And students said, you know, what I noticed is that, you know, this is definitely coming from like a male perspective, like this. And so the other thing that they pointed out is they said, you know, virtually every class that we take here shows us like the mistakes of the past. Like, what about showing like what was done right, you know, in certain situations?
Yes.
And so basically we scrapped the whole film list and we we invited students to like have a say. They filled out a form. They submitted some of their ideas. They had amazing suggestions. We changed the perception or the ways in which we were positioning the screenings so that it really is about a more positive outlook in terms of what's going on in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I appreciate what you say, Georgia. I think that's really important. And for all of you students out there, I think it's also important to acknowledge that even though you go into a classroom space and you think of this hierarchy between the faculty member and student, you still have a valuable perspective, and your faculty members want to hear that perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
We have one last question. We're going to move on to wrap up. Is how far can someone outside of the LGBT plus community ethically take queer representation in media? How much can someone who doesn't know these lived experiences really depict them?
Well, first, I just spoke. Does anybody else want to respond first to that? I'm just going to talk about the R word. I'm going to talk about research. And I'll refer to a novel that I adapted that was written by a wonderful, wonderful Black writer, B.B. Moore Campbell. B.B. and I served on the executive board of the Los Angeles Pan America West together, and we became friends. And I was very impressed with her novel called Your Blues Ain't Like Mine, which was a fictional telling of the Emmett Till tragedy, and covered 40 years of racism and recovery from the standpoint of the family of the boy that was killed, and from the white killer's family, and from a newspaper editor who was related to both white and Black families. So I optioned that book. I set it up at Showtime, and when I finished the script, I gave it to BB, and I said, and this was not part of the contract or part of the deal. I said, I can't move forward until I have you sign off on this. Tell me what I've gotten right. Tell me what I've gotten wrong, so that I can further honor your vision. Now, that was an adaptation of an existing novel, but I'm a great believer in research, and again, asking questions, and always being curious and never being afraid to learn. Because, and I'll turn it on its head. I mean, I look at Alan Ball and that pilot. You know, of course, he was writing David's character beautifully and with authenticity. He also wrote every straight character with the same strength and power and authenticity, because he was able to look at the common humanity. So that would be my short answer to what you're talking about.
I can answer. I'm sorry. I was thinking about all the Asian films and Asian American films that I could recommend. But the questions are so good. So I'm just going to jump in really quickly to answer this important question about what it means to represent, especially if you're not part of the community that you're representing. And funnily enough, I just taught in Evan's class in CTS 150. And this question invariably comes up in my classroom, especially because I talk about representational politics so much, and the importance of reading race, class, gender, ability, sexuality, religion through an intersectional lens. And that which means to say that we have to analyze these characters intersectionally, how it is that they are not just defined in terms of one singular identity, but in fact are their characters, their subjectivities are just like in terms of our lived realities are intersectional or interrelated. So on the question of then what is the responsibility of the creator or the maker to ethically and authentically represent this community, I would really want to flip the script on that kind of question and ask what it means to be that, to be privileged enough to even ask that question, to be privileged enough to have access to the means for which by which you're able to represent another community. And so that kind of self-questioning shows to me a maturity in your creatives thinking about the kinds of ethics in representing the other. And this is a very important question because I think it comes back to what you had all also talked about in terms of voice and being marginalized. And I just want to really question those terms because I want to ask, why is it that we are labeling another community marginal? I think I would follow, as a creator or as a writer myself, I would want to follow Toni Morrison's words when she says, in her writing, she wants to bring the center and drag the center to the margins. And I think we really need to think about not just adding in terms of a cumulative effect, all these kinds of diverse representations, but really question and challenge and think about the power relations that, buttress these representations that we keep seeing over and over again, even with the additive measures. So with the additive measures, that's also a problem because if we're saying somebody, and this goes back to Evan's point about the burden of representation, if one person is able to give voice to the voiceless, that means the cultural elites are still saying that's the one voice for everybody else. And I really want to just question, who's able to call another community marginalized and who's able to be called the center and who is able to be called the voiceless as opposed to being that voice. And I think in terms of my work, I'm questioning that, and I think it's an old colonial tactic to be able to say that is the margins, this is the center. And I think in forging different paths, we need to flip the script on that dynamic.
And that's such a powerful argument for like independent filmmaking or independent media making in general, right? That this idea that we don't necessarily have to enter an industry and, work hard to assimilate into that industry, to make media, to have our voices heard, to really have an impact in, the kind of media landscape or ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. Sorry we went over time to our panelists, but thank you to our panelists so much. I wish you could see everyone clapping, but thank you everyone for coming. This closes out our QSCA Welcome Week, but we're really excited to hit the semester running.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. We will send out this recording to everybody to watch later on and enjoy many of your perspectives and hopefully with audio, unlike some of us had. So thank you so much. And let us know if there's anything else you'd like to send out to the attendees as well after this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.